I discovered my family hid a brother in a dark experiment. The truth changed everything. Reddit stories. They say every house carries echoes of those who lived in it. Footsteps soaked into floorboards, whispered arguments lingering in corners, laughter trapped between the walls. The house I grew up in wasn't particularly old or grand. Modest two-story colonial tucked in a quiet cul-de-sac where the trees arched protectively over cracked sidewalks. Yet for all its plainness, it felt timeless, as if untouched by the world outside. Time, it seemed, had stood still within its walls, preserving not just the house itself, but everything it contained: memories, emotions, secrets. Especially secrets. It's strange now to think of how little we questioned things then. I was the youngest of 3 children. My brother Ethan was the oldest by 8 years, then my sister Claire, 5 years older than me. I remember watching them sometimes from the bottom step of the staircase, just observing without joining in, sensing a current between them I didn't yet understand. Our parents, Anne and Richard, seemed the very model of stability. Dad worked long hours as an accountant at a mid-sized firm. Mom stayed home, keeping the house immaculate, always preparing elaborate meals, managing birthdays, school projects, holidays with an almost military precision. Outsiders saw us as a perfect family. But behind that veneer were undercurrents none of us fully grasped at the time. There was an unspoken tension that hung in the air like humidity in summer, invisible, oppressive. You didn't talk about certain things. You didn't ask why Dad sometimes came home hours later than he claimed, or why Mom would go silent for entire evenings after mysterious phone calls. You didn't ask why Ethan's grades, once stellar, had started to slip, or why Claire would sneak out after midnight and return with mascara streaked down her cheeks. You certainly didn't ask why the attic remained locked at all times. The attic. Yes, that was the heart of it, the space none of us acknowledged, but all of us were acutely aware of. The one time I did ask about it, around age 7, Mom's reaction was swift and chilling. "Don't ever go near there," she snapped, her face pale, her voice trembling. After that, I never mentioned it again. But curiosity burrows deep in a child's mind. I'd stare at that door sometimes, the old brass knob gleaming faintly in the dim hallway light, daring myself to turn it. Of course, I never did. Not then. Childhood has a way of both clarifying and obscuring truth. Looking back, I realize how much was carefully orchestrated. The family photo albums, for example. Dozens of them, meticulously arranged on the living room shelves. Every birthday, vacation, and holiday carefully documented. And yet there were gaps. Whole stretches of time with no pictures, faces cropped strangely, smiles that didn't reach the eyes. Even the photos themselves had a strange quality to them, as if frozen, staged. I remember one album in particular, labeled Summer 2003, the year I turned 6. There were plenty of pictures, beach outings, picnics, family barbecues. But one afternoon, flipping through the album alone, I noticed something odd. In several photos, there was an extra shadow. A figure on the periphery, blurred, indistinct, almost erased. I showed it to Claire. She stared at the page for a long time, her face tightening. Then she slammed the album shut and told me never to look through them again. It wasn't until much later that I understood why. Childhood turned to adolescence, and cracks in the facade widened. Ethan left for college but rarely came home. When he did, he seemed thinner, withdrawn, a cigarette perpetually in hand. Claire became even more rebellious, clashing with our parents constantly. I tried to stay out of the way, though part of me longed to understand what was happening beneath the surface. One afternoon when I was 16, everything began to unravel. It started with a storm. A real one. Thunder shaking the windows, rain slashing against the siding. Mom and Dad were out, stranded at a charity gala. Claire and I were alone in the house. I was in the living room when the power flickered and died. The house fell into deep, oppressive silence, broken only by the wind. I was about to light some candles when Claire appeared, flashlight in hand, her face pale. "Something's wrong," she said. I followed her upstairs. The attic door was ajar. That stopped me cold. It had been locked my entire life. Now it stood slightly open, the gap yawning like a mouth about to speak. Claire looked at me, eyes wide with fear. "Did you open it?" she asked. I shook my head. We stood there for a moment, neither of us daring to move closer. Then, without another word, Claire pushed the door fully open and stepped inside. I hesitated, then followed. The attic was cold, colder than it should have been. The air thick with dust and something else. Something metallic, acrid. Shapes loomed in the flashlight's beam, old trunks, faded furniture, stacks of brittle newspapers. And in the center of the room, an old cedar chest. Its lid was slightly ajar. Claire approached it, knelt, and lifted the lid. Inside were photographs. Hundreds of them, some yellowed with age, others more recent. All of us were in them, Mom, Dad, Ethan, Claire, me. But there were also photos of another child, a boy. Blonde, about Claire's age. His face appeared again and again. Birthday parties, school plays, beach trips. In some, he stood between Ethan and Claire, arms slung around their shoulders. In others, he sat beside Mom, smiling shyly. My breath caught. "Who is he?" I whispered. Claire didn't answer. She was trembling, tears sliding down her cheeks. And then, beneath the photos, we found something else, a birth certificate, a name, Daniel Robert Whitmore. Date of birth, April 2, 1989. Same last name as ours. Same parents listed, Anne and Richard Whitmore. My world tilted. I couldn't make sense of it. Another brother? One I had no memory of. One we had never, ever spoken of. Claire finally spoke, her voice shaking. "He was our brother," she said, "before you were born." But something happened. Her words were cut off by the sound of the front door slamming below. Mom and Dad were home. Panic surged. Claire shoved the photos back into the chest, closed the lid, grabbed my hand. We slipped out of the attic and closed the door behind us just as footsteps pounded up the stairs. Mom appeared, drenched from the rain, eyes blazing. She stared at the attic door, then at us. "What were you doing up here?" she demanded. Claire opened her mouth, but no sound came. I spoke instead, the truth spilling out before I could stop myself. "Who is Daniel?" The silence that followed was deafening. Mom's face went bloodless. For a moment, I thought she might collapse. Then she straightened, her expression hardening into something cold and unfamiliar. "You must never speak of him again," she said. "Do you understand?" Her tone brooked no argument, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Over the following weeks, I became obsessed. I searched through everything. Old yearbooks, newspapers, anything that might mention Daniel, and I found nothing, as if he had been erased. Even the family albums had been altered, pages removed, photos carefully excised. Only the ones in the attic remained. And yet, strange things began happening after that night. Whispers in the hallway when no one was there. The attic door sometimes ajar again, though we never touched it. Lights flickering without cause. Once, I found one of Daniel's photos on my pillow, though I had never removed it from the chest. When I showed it to Claire, she looked terrified. "He's trying to tell us something," she whispered. And then, one morning, Ethan returned unexpectedly. He looked haunted, older than his years. When we told him what we'd found, he went very still. Then he said something that chilled me to the bone. He didn't die. At least, not the way they told us. The pieces didn't fit. What had happened to Daniel? Why had he been erased from our lives? And why, after so many years, was he reaching out now? The answers lay hidden in the house, where time had stood still for too long. And I was determined to uncover them, even if it meant confronting the darkest truths of our family. Even if it meant facing what waited beyond the attic door. I couldn't shake the image of Daniel's face from my mind. For days after Ethan's cryptic statement, I found myself staring at that single photo I'd kept hidden beneath my mattress. Daniel with a crooked smile, eyes that seemed to follow me. The question that gnawed at me most wasn't why he had been erased. It was why now. Why was he reaching through the years at this moment, pulling us back into whatever had been buried so carefully? The house itself seemed changed. Small things at first. The grandfather clock in the hallway chiming at odd times, cold spots in certain rooms even when the heat was on. The attic door, once sealed for decades, now refused to stay closed. More than once I would pass by and find it slightly ajar, the old hinges creaking softly as if breathing. And then there were the dreams, vivid, unsettling. I'd wake drenched in sweat, heart pounding, fragments of whispered words lingering in my ears. In every dream, I stood at the foot of the attic stairs, looking up at the open door. And in the shadows, someone watched me. One night I woke gasping, convinced I'd heard footsteps outside my bedroom. When I opened the door, the hallway was empty, but the attic door was wide open again. I knew I couldn't ignore this any longer. I needed answers, real ones, and I needed help. Ethan was reluctant at first. Whatever he'd learned over the years had scarred him deeply. But after a long night of coaxing, he finally agreed. Claire joined us without hesitation. The three of us sat together in the living room, lights low, while Ethan spoke. They told us Daniel drowned. He began, voice low. It was summer 1998. We were at the lake house. One afternoon, Daniel disappeared. They searched for days. When they finally found his body, they said it was an accident. He paused, hands trembling. But it wasn't. I saw something. Heard things I wasn't supposed to. Dad was arguing with someone late at night. He said, we had no choice. He knew too much. After that, they never spoke of him again. Claire looked stricken. What didn't you tell us? Ethan shook his head. I was a kid. I didn't understand. And when I started asking questions, things happened. My bike brakes failed. I fell down the stairs. After that, I stopped. My skin prickled. It was too calculated to be coincidence. But what could a child like Daniel have known that was worth burying so completely? The lake house. It was a place I barely remembered. We hadn't been there since I was 4. The following weekend, while our parents were away on one of their charity trips, we made a plan. We would go back to the lake house. If answers existed, they were there. The drive was uneventful, but as we neared the old property, a heavy sense of dread settled over me. The house stood at the edge of a dense forest, its white paint peeling, windows dark. Nature had begun reclaiming it. Vines crawling up the porch, wild grass waist high. Inside, the air was stale, thick with dust and disuse. Furniture draped in yellowed sheets, faded photos still on the walls. And in one corner of the living room, an old toy chest, its lid slightly ajar. Claire knelt, lifting it. Inside were toys, trucks, action figures, and a waterlogged journal. The name scrawled inside it, Daniel. My heart pounded as we gathered around. Pages stuck together, but what we could read chilled me. They watch me when they think I'm asleep. Mom and Dad fight about the man with the briefcase. Ethan says not to tell anyone. But I saw the papers. The man in the basement. He was sick. We stared at one another, a dawning horror taking shape. Who was the man in the basement? What papers had Daniel seen? Before we could speculate further, a loud crash echoed upstairs. We froze. Then Ethan grabbed a flashlight and led the way. The second floor was as decayed as the first, doors swollen shut, floors warped. But one door, at the end of the hall, hung open. Inside was what had once been a study. Books scattered, a toppled filing cabinet, and taped to the wall, brittle with age. A yellowed newspaper clipping. Local doctor under investigation for illegal drug trials. The name beneath the photo, Dr. Marcus Vellum. Dad's old business partner. The pieces began falling into place. Illegal drug trials. A sick man hidden in the basement. Daniel's journal entries. Our parents' desperate efforts to erase him. They'd been involved, and Daniel had known. We have to go back, Ethan said grimly. There's more at the house. We need proof. That night, sleep eluded me. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of wind seemed laced with meaning. When morning came, I felt hollow but resolute. We returned to our family home under the guise of spending a sibling weekend. Mom was suspicious, but she said nothing. That evening, when our parents retired to bed, we crept to the attic once more. This time, we searched thoroughly. Beneath the floorboards, Ethan pried loose a hidden panel. Inside were folders, Legal documents, medical records, letters. The truth spilled out in black and white. Dad and dark. Vellum had conducted unauthorized experiments on terminal patients, promising miracle cures. Some patients had died. The man Daniel wrote about had been one of them, hidden in our basement to avoid exposure. Daniel had seen too much. His death had not been an accident. They'd silenced him to protect themselves. The enormity of it was staggering and dangerous. If our parents realized what we knew, we had to be careful. But as we debated our next steps, the attic door slammed shut behind us with a force that shook the walls. The temperature dropped sharply. Our breaths fogged the air. And then, faintly at first, a voice, Daniel's voice, whispered, "Help me." The flashlight flickered, died. In the darkness, a figure emerged, child silhouette, eyes glowing faintly. Claire sobbed, reaching out. "Daniel?" The figure wavered, then pointed to the chest. Heart hammering, I opened it again. Beneath the photos, another compartment. Inside, a cassette tape, labeled simply, "Play Me." We didn't dare listen there. Grabbing the tape, we fled the attic, hearts pounding. In the safety of Ethan's apartment, we finally played it. The static-filled recording began with a child's voice. "Daniel, if you're hearing this, something bad happened to me. They think no one will find out, but I know the truth. Dad and Vellum hurt people. I saw them. Please tell someone." His voice faded, replaced by muffled arguing. Dad's voice, harsh, cold. "We can't risk it. He knows. You know what has to be done." The tape ended. We sat in stunned silence. There it was, undeniable proof. But what to do with it? The next morning, Ethan made contact with an investigative journalist he trusted. Carefully, we provided copies of the documents, the tape. An expose was in the works. But we underestimated our parents. One evening, I returned home to find my room ransacked, the attic chest missing. Mom confronted me, eyes wild. "You don't understand what you're doing," she hissed. "We protected this family," but the truth was already spreading. Weeks later, the story broke. Our parents were arrested, their carefully constructed lives in ruins. The house was sealed off, the attic evidence preserved. In the aftermath, with the weight of truth finally exposed, strange things in the house ceased. The whispers stopped. The attic door remained closed, and one final, chilling discovery came to light. Among the recovered documents was a photo, dated months after Daniel's supposed death. A blurry image of a blond boy in a crowd, older, thinner, but unmistakably him. The caption, "Unknown child, sighted in rural Maine." My blood ran cold. If Daniel hadn't died, where had he gone? Why had he reached out now? And most of all, was he still out there, waiting for us to find him? The story wasn't over. The house had given up its secrets, but the deepest mystery remained. And I knew with certainty that we hadn't seen the last of Daniel. The story exploded across the media. Local family tied to decades-old medical scandal. The headlines screamed. Photographs of my parents, once the picture of suburban respectability, were plastered across news sites and television screens. Our quiet cul-de-sac became a circus of reporters and gawkers. Ethan, Claire, and I stayed mostly at Ethan's apartment, avoiding the chaos. But even in that relative safety, none of us could sleep. Because beneath the vindication of having exposed the truth was the deeper question that haunted us: Daniel might still be alive. That grainy photograph, spotted in a forgotten file among the court evidence, had shattered everything we thought we knew. Taken months after his supposed death, the image showed a boy of about 10 with Daniel's unmistakable features. He looked thinner, wary, dressed in ill-fitting clothes. The location, rural Maine, offered our only lead. How could he have survived? And if he had, why had our parents lied? Why maintain the story of his drowning so adamantly? We pored over the evidence late into each night, trying to piece together what might have happened. One detail stood out among the seized documents was a series of financial records, unexplained transfers to an account in Maine, continuing for years after Daniel's disappearance. Someone had been keeping him hidden. The question was who and why. Ethan insisted we bring this to the journalist who had broken the story, a seasoned investigator named Malcolm Crane. When we showed him the photo and the bank records, his eyes narrowed. "This isn't over," he said. "He's alive. He may be the key to everything." Together, we began tracing the money trail. The account belonged to a shell corporation, which led to a small private medical facility, long since shuttered, in northern Maine. It matched one of the locations Daniel had mentioned in his childhood journal, the cold place in the woods. That was enough for us. Despite our fear, despite knowing we were wading into dangerous waters, we decided to go. If Daniel was out there, we owed it to him, and to ourselves, to find him. The drive was long and tense, miles of winding roads through dense forest. As we neared the coordinates Malcolm had uncovered, the trees seemed to close in, sunlight struggling through the thick canopy. Finally, we came upon a rusted gate, half collapsed, with a faded sign barely legible: Blackwood Institute, Private Research Facility. The place was a ruin. Windows shattered, vines creeping through the foundation. Yet even in its decay, it exuded an oppressive presence, as though it resented our intrusion. We searched room by room. Laboratories stood frozen in time. Broken equipment, moldy files, rusted gurneys. In one office, Claire found a ledger listing patients, coded names, dates, experimental treatments, and there it was, subject DW, admitted 1998, last notation 2005, relocated. Status active. My heart pounded. He'd been years, and then moved. But to where? That night, we camped nearby, unable to tear ourselves away. The forest was eerily silent. No birds, no insects, just the wind whispering through the trees. In the small hours, I woke to find Claire gone. Panic surged. I grabbed a flashlight and followed faint footprints leading deeper into the woods. I found her standing before an old root cellar hidden beneath tangled underbrush. The door hung ajar. Inside, stairs descended into darkness. Together, we went down. The air grew colder, damper. At the bottom, a small chamber, its walls lined with decaying mattresses and rusted restraints. But there, etched into the wall, were words scratched by a child's hand: "I am still here. Don't forget me." We stared in stunned silence. Claire began to cry softly. He'd been kept here, alone, terrified. But how had he escaped? And why leave this message? We returned to Ethan, shaken. He listened, grim-faced. "We're close," he said. "Too close to stop now." Malcolm's continued research provided the next piece. A nurse connected to Blackwood had moved to a remote town further north. A few discreet inquiries revealed whispers of a strange boy taken in by a local family. No records, no school enrollment, barely seen. Could it be him? We had to know. The town was a bleak outpost of sagging buildings and wary stairs. When we showed Daniel's photo, most people turned away. But an elderly shopkeeper finally spoke. "The boy," she whispered. "A woman named Lydia Hayes had him for a while, lived out on Hollow Road. We found the house easily, an old farmhouse, paint peeling, windows dark. No sign of life. The door was ajar. Inside, the place was abandoned in haste. Furniture overturned, dishes still in the sink, and in an upstairs room, a child's drawings covering the walls. Crude, desperate images of a boy behind bars, faceless figures looming. Among them, a single phrase scrawled again and again: "They watch. They wait. I must hide." A noise startled us. Footsteps on the porch. We turned to find a gaunt woman with hollow eyes, Lydia Hayes. At first, she refused to speak, but when we mentioned Daniel, her facade cracked. "He was here," she whispered. "They paid me to keep him hidden." But he was different. They could hear them. Voices in the dark. One night, he fled. I never saw him again. Where had he gone? Lydia handed us a torn notebook. "He left this behind." Inside, Daniel's desperate scrawlings. Fragments of thought: "They'll find me. Have to go deeper. The place under the river." It was cryptic, but Malcolm recognized the reference. A network of abandoned tunnels beneath an old hydroelectric plant upriver. Our next destination. By now, fear gnawed at us constantly. We were being followed. We sensed it. Unmarked cars trailing us, strange figures watching. We moved carefully, always together. The plant was a crumbling relic of another era. Gaining entry was easy. The place had been deserted for decades. The tunnels beneath were a labyrinth of rusted pipes and dripping water. For hours we searched, calling softly, "Daniel, it's your family." At last, we found signs, a makeshift bed, scraps of food, pages covered in drawings. And then a shadow moved. A boy, a young man now, emerged from the darkness, thin, pale, eyes wide with terror. It was Daniel. He knew us instantly. His voice, hoarse from disuse, whispered, "You found me." The reunion was heartbreaking. Tears flowed freely. But Daniel was fragile, his mind scarred by years of isolation and experimentation. Slowly, he told us fragments of his ordeal. How after Blackwood shut down, he'd been moved, used, watched. But something had changed. His abilities. He could sense things others couldn't. Hear thoughts, see glimpses of intentions. That's how he'd reached out to us. Through the dreams, the whispers. But he also knew danger was near. "They're coming," he warned. "They always find me." We had to move fast. But as we led him toward the surface, figures appeared. Men in black, armed, faces cold. A trap. We fled through the tunnels, adrenaline surging. Daniel, despite his frailty, seemed to guide us, sensing the safest path. After a harrowing chase, we burst into daylight. Escaping through a hidden exit Malcolm had scouted. We didn't stop until we were miles away. Now, Daniel is safe, hidden under Malcolm's protection, receiving care. But the fight is far from over. The forces that hunted him remain powerful, and the true extent of what was done to him, what he is now, remains a terrifying mystery. But one thing is certain, the past can no longer be buried. The house where time stood still had unleashed its darkest secret, and the battle for truth, and for Daniel's future, has only just begun. For a time after Daniel's rescue, there was a strange, suspended calm, as if the world itself was holding its breath. We holed up in a remote safe house that Malcolm had arranged, an old cabin deep in the Vermont woods, far from prying eyes. It was meant to be temporary, just until Daniel regained some strength and clarity. But days turned into weeks, and still we remained, bound together by fear and fragile hope. Daniel was different now, both in ways we could see and in those we couldn't. His body was thin, almost translucent in the right light, scars crisscrossing his arms and back. Some surgical, others from restraints. But the most unsettling changes were beneath the surface. He often seemed to drift, staring into unseen distances, murmuring fragments of thoughts not his own. Once, I found him in the dead of night, sitting by the window, whispering, "They're still looking. They'll always be looking." Despite everything, his bond with us, Ethan, Claire, and me, grew stronger. He trusted us. Slowly, haltingly, he began to share more of what had been done to him. The experiments hadn't stopped with physical tests. They'd sought to unlock something else. "They called it Project Sentinel," he said one evening, voice low and hollow. "Tried to turn me into a receiver. Said I could hear the frequency beneath thought. See what's coming before it happens." None of us understood fully, but we saw glimpses. One afternoon, as Claire prepared tea in the kitchen, Daniel spoke softly from across the room, "Don't drop the cup." Moments later, her fingers slipped. The cup nearly shattered on the floor. His warnings came too often to be coincidence. He knew things, sensed intentions before words were spoken. And he always knew when danger was near. The threat wasn't over. The men who'd tried to take him from the tunnels hadn't been random mercenaries. They were remnants of the network behind Blackwood, what Malcolm called the Deep Clinic, a web of rogue scientists, financiers, and covert operatives still desperate to reclaim their lost asset, Daniel. We kept to a strict routine, but isolation wore on all of us. Malcolm brought supplies and updates from the outside world. One evening, grim-faced, he handed us a new file. "There's a pattern," he said. "Other kids, other subjects, some vanished, some didn't survive. But one name kept surfacing, Dr. Marcus Vellum." The name sent a chill through me. The man whose partnership with our father had started it all, officially dead in a car accident years ago. But Malcolm wasn't so sure. "There's chatter," he said. "Cryptid comms suggest Vellum's alive. operating from an unknown site, codename Arclight, and he wants Daniel back. The news shook us. Daniel seemed unsurprised. "He's always watching," he whispered. We debated next steps. Ethan was adamant we couldn't run forever. If we didn't confront this, they'd hunt us to the ends of the earth. Claire agreed, her old fire returning. For the first time, even Daniel spoke with conviction. "We need to find Arclight," he said. "End it." Malcolm warned us it would be dangerous, but he had a lead, a former Blackwood technician named Rourke, living off-grid in New Hampshire. If anyone knew how to find Arclight, it was him. The journey to Rourke's cabin was tense. Hours of backroads and dense forest. We found the place shuttered and silent. But as we approached, a voice crackled through an old speaker. "No closer. You brought him, didn't you?" Daniel stepped forward. "Yes," he said simply. After a long pause, the door creaked open. Rourke was gaunt, haunted eyes darting constantly. Inside, amidst piles of electronics and files, he told us the truth. "Arclight's real," he said, "hidden deep underground. Former military site repurposed after Blackwood fell. Vellum's still there, and he's built something worse." He showed us schematics, neural interface chambers, frequency transmitters. They want to create an army of sentinels. Daniel was the prototype. The horror sank in. But Rourke had one more revelation. "There's a back door," he said. "An old service tunnel. I can get you close." The plan was risky, but it was our only chance. We spent days preparing, mapping routes, gathering supplies. Daniel grew stronger, more focused. One night, he spoke to me alone. "I remember now," he said. "The lake house the night they took me. It wasn't an accident. Dad helped them. But he didn't want to. They threatened us all." The revelation stunned me. Could our father have been a pawn, not just a monster? It didn't excuse what he'd done, but it complicated everything. The night of the infiltration came cold and moonless. Guided by Rourke, we navigated old logging roads to a remote mountain range. There, hidden beneath a camouflaged hatch, lay the tunnel entrance. We descended into darkness, flashlights flickering. The air grew colder, the walls slick with moisture. For hours we crept through the maze, every shadow a potential threat. Finally, we reached the perimeter of Arclight, a vast subterranean complex humming with unseen power. Through observation ports, we glimpsed horrors, children in glass cells, machines pulsing with eerie light. And there in a central chamber, Vellum himself, older, gaunt, but unmistakably alive. He spoke to his acolytes, voice icy with conviction. "The next phase begins tonight. The prototype must be recovered. We had to act fast." Using Rourke's access codes, we slipped deeper inside. Our goal was twofold: extract the captive children and destroy the core systems, but fate intervened. In a deserted lab, we found a sealed vault, and within, rows of cryogenic pods. One stood open. Inside, a mirror image of Daniel, another boy identical in every feature but unconscious, pale. A second prototype. Daniel stood frozen, eyes wide. "I remember him," he whispered. "We were together. He's my twin." The shock hit us hard. We'd known nothing of this. Vellum had created not one prototype, but two. The implications were staggering, but there was no time to process it. Alarms blared, our presence detected. Armed guards flooded the halls. Chaos erupted. We fought our way toward the extraction point, Daniel using his abilities to anticipate ambushes, guiding us through the maze. The twin, whom we now called Noah, based on a scrawled nameplate, remained unconscious but alive. We reached the exit moments before the tunnel collapsed behind us, Rourke triggering explosive charges to cripple the facility. For now, we were safe. But the cost was high. Rourke had been wounded, and Vellum had escaped. Back at the safe house, we tended to know. As he slowly regained consciousness, it became clear. His mind was fractured, memories fragmented. But one thing was certain: he and Daniel shared a bond beyond understanding. They could sense each other's thoughts, finish each other's sentences, and they shared the same warning. It isn't over. Vellum will come, and he won't stop this time. As we regrouped, a new resolve settled over us. The fight wasn't just for Daniel anymore, or even for no. It was for every life twisted by Project Sentinel. We couldn't run. We had to end it. Together, the storm was coming, and this time, we'd be ready. The days after the Arclight raid were a blur of exhaustion and planning. We knew we'd dealt a blow, but we hadn't stopped them. Vellum had escaped, and if Daniel and No's warnings were true, retaliation was inevitable. The safe house no longer felt safe. Too many eyes were on us now. Even Malcolm, usually the pillar of calm, was tense, pacing constantly, phone in hand as he worked his network for any hint of Vellum's next move. And through it all, Daniel and No remained at the center of the storm. The bond between them deepened daily, though it wasn't without cost. They shared more than memories. They shared pain, fragmented visions, an overwhelming sense of being watched. Often they would wake gasping in the night, speaking in tandem of places they'd never seen, voices they shouldn't know. "He's close," Daniel said one morning, pale and trembling. "Huh. He's using the link, trying to pull us back." Vellum wasn't just hunting us physically. He was reaching through the neural connections he'd forged in them. If we didn't find a way to sever that link, he would always be a step ahead. It was Claire who found the lead. Digging through the data Malcolm had salvaged from Arclight, she uncovered references to something called Project Meridian, an experimental protocol designed to isolate and amplify the Sentinel frequency. A name appeared repeatedly in the notes: Dr. Liz Amaro, a former Blackwood researcher who had gone underground after the original scandal. If anyone knew how to break Vellum's hold, it was her. The search for Marrow took us to the edges of society. Forgotten towns, abandoned research sites, old contacts who spoke only in whispers. Finally, through one of Malcolm's informants, we traced her to a secluded island off the coast of Nova Scotia. It was a long shot, but we had no choice. The journey there was treacherous. Stormy seas, an aging boat barely seaworthy. But when we arrived, the island was eerily quiet, shrouded in mist. An old lighthouse stood at its center, light long dead. And there, in a crumbling cottage, we found her. Eliza Marrow was nothing like I'd imagined. Small, shy-eyed, her once raven hair gone silver. At first, she refused to let us in. But when Daniel and No spoke, finishing each other's sentences, her resolve cracked. "You're both still alive," she whispered. Inside, over flickering candlelight, she told us the truth. "Huh?" Project Meridian was Vellum's obsession, she said. He believed the human mind could be tuned like an instrument, made to receive and transmit beyond normal perception. Daniel and No, you were his greatest success. But he didn't account for your bond. That's what saved you. Could the bond also be used to break Vellum's control? Eliza thought it might. If we can create a counter-frequency, she said, we may sever the link. But it's dangerous. It could destroy what makes you who you are. Daniel and No didn't hesitate. "Do it," they said as one. The preparation took days. Eliza's equipment was ancient, cobbled together from scraps. But her knowledge was unmatched. As the apparatus hummed to life, Daniel and No were placed in a crude resonance chamber. The process was agonizing to watch, waves of energy rippling through them, faces contorted in pain. At one point, Noah screamed, "He's here! He's inside!" But Daniel reached for his brother's hand, anchoring them both. And then silence. When it was over, they collapsed into each other's arms, trembling but alive. "It's quieter," Daniel said weakly. "I can't hear him anymore." The link was broken, but our triumph was short-lived. That night, as we prepared to leave the island, an urgent call came from Malcolm's second-in-command. "They've hit the safe house," she said. "It's gone. They know everything." Vellum was making his move. We were out of time. Eliza, despite her age, refused to let us face this alone. "If he's escalating," she said, "it means he's desperate. He's moving to the final phase." Through her intelligence contacts, we learned of a new site, codenamed Sanctum, deep beneath an abandoned missile silo in the Midwest. It was there, we believed, that Vellum planned to launch the next iteration of Project Sentinel. If we didn't stop him, Countless others would suffer as Daniel and Noah had. The decision was unanimous. We would go. The infiltration was the most dangerous yet. Malcolm coordinated with trusted allies, disavowed agents, rogue scientists, forming a small strike team. Every moment was critical. We moved under cover of night, slipping through layers of security deeper and deeper into Sanctum's core. What we found was worse than we'd imagined. Dozens of children, wired into grotesque neural networks, their consciousnesses stripped and manipulated. Machines pulsed with unnatural energy, the air thick with static. And at the center, Vellum himself, pale and gaunt, eyes blazing with fanatic light. "You can't stop it," he shouted when we confronted him. "The future belongs to us." A brutal battle erupted. Guards, automated defenses. In the chaos, Daniel and Noah moved with eerie synchronicity, guiding us toward the central control hub. There, Eliza initiated a shutdown sequence, but Vellum triggered a failsafe, a countdown to total system collapse. We had minutes to escape. As we fled, Daniel suddenly stopped. "He's still here," he whispered. Against all reason, he and Noah turned back. We couldn't leave them. Together, we stormed the core chamber. There, trapped in a containment field, was a third prototype, a young girl, barely 12, her mind fractured but alive. "She's like us," Noah said. "We can't leave her." With Eliza's help, we breached the field and carried her out, seconds before the complex imploded in a cascade of fire and light. We emerged into the dawn, battered but victorious. Vellum was gone, presumed dead in the collapse. But the war wasn't over. Too many questions remained. Who else had been involved? How far had the project spread? And the girl, whom we named Eve, held secrets we had yet to understand. But for now, we had each other. A family forged in fire. And as we looked to the uncertain road ahead, one truth was clear: we would face it together. No matter what came. The weeks after the fall of Sanctum felt like waking from a nightmare that had gone on too long. The media reported the explosion as an accident at an old government site, the truth buried beneath layers of official silence. But those of us who had been inside knew better. We had witnessed the heart of something monstrous, a machine built not of metal and wires, but of human lives twisted beyond recognition. And though Sanctum was gone, we all knew the deeper network that had birthed it was still out there. Malcolm moved us to yet another safe house, this one buried in the Appalachian foothills, a place known to only a handful of trusted allies. There, we began to rebuild, to heal. Daniel and Noah had come through the final assault forever changed. The severed link to Vellum had freed them, but it had also unmoored parts of them. They still moved in eerie synchronicity, still spoke sometimes in unison, as if echoes of their shared torment remained woven into their souls. Eve was a different story altogether. The girl we had pulled from the Sanctum core remained silent for days, staring with wide, haunted eyes. But gradually, she began to respond, first to Daniel and Noah, then to Claire and me. Her memories were fragmented, her past obscured by whatever horrors had been done to her. But one thing became clear: she was even more advanced than the twins. Her abilities, subtle at first, grew daily. She could anticipate not just thoughts, but events, sometimes minutes or hours before they occurred. One morning, she calmly warned Malcolm not to take a certain road into town. That afternoon, news came of an ambush on that very route, an apparent accident that was anything but. "She's a true sentinel," Eliza whispered one night, more than they ever dreamed. It was both awe-inspiring and terrifying, and it raised a deeper question. What was the purpose of such a creation? To control minds? To predict the future? To manipulate reality itself? We didn't know, and neither did Eve. But there was one more thread left dangling: Vellum. His body had not been recovered. Some of Malcolm's sources believed he had died in the collapse. Others weren't so sure. And Daniel was certain. "He's alive," he told us one cold morning, voice flat. "I can feel him. He's hiding. Planning." The problem was we had no way to track him. The network had gone to ground, cells scattered and silent. We needed a new approach. It was Eliza who proposed the unthinkable. "Eve can find him. she said. She's tuned to the frequency that binds them all. If we can safely amplify her connection, just enough, she might lead us to him. It was a dangerous idea. The risk to Eve was enormous. But when asked, she simply nodded. "I want to help," she said quietly, and so the preparations began. In the depths of the safe house, we built a crude resonance chamber, a stripped-down version of the system used at Sanctum. Carefully, methodically, Eliza calibrated the settings, with Daniel and No there to guide and ground Eve through the process. The night of the attempt, the air was thick with tension. We gathered in the chamber, every system double-checked. Eve sat calmly at the center, eyes closed. When Eliza activated the system, the room hummed with unseen energy. At first, nothing happened. Then Eve gasped, eyes flying open, pupils blown wide. "I see him," she whispered. "He's underground in a city there are signs numbers 1972. The system overloaded then, sparks flying. Eliza shut it down fast. Eve collapsed into Daniel's arms, exhausted but alive. We pieced together the clues. The numbers matched an old sublevel beneath New York City, part of a decommissioned Cold War command center. If Vellum had fled there, it made sense. It was perfect for someone like him, hidden, shielded from surveillance. We moved quickly. Malcolm coordinated a surgical strike team, just us and a few trusted allies. The entry was through an abandoned subway station. For hours we navigated decaying tunnels, deeper and deeper into the undercity. And then we found it, a sealed blast door, its control panel still functional. Inside was a sprawling bunker, humming with faint power. We advanced room by room, empty labs. Data servers still running, signs of recent occupation, but no Vellum, until we reached the core chamber. There, seated at an ancient control desk, was the man himself, Marcus Vellum, alive. Gaunt, eyes sunken, but burning with that same mad light. He looked at us and smiled. "You found me at last," he said softly. "But you're too late." Alarms triggered. Gas vents hissed. A trap. But Eve, sensing it, reacted first, disabling the system with a thought, the controls sparking under her unseen influence. Vellum laughed. "Remarkable," he whispered. "You truly are beyond what I dreamed. But do you understand yet?" And then he revealed the final twist. Sanctum had not been the core project. It was a decoy. The real program, Project Origin, had begun decades earlier, and its first success was not Daniel, nor No, nor Eve, it was me. The words struck like thunder. I stared at him uncomprehending. "You're lying," I whispered, but he shook his head. "Your father was one of us," Vellum said. "The first trials were on their own children. You were altered in the womb. The normal child, the control. But you're not normal. You've always felt it, haven't you?" My mind reeled, memories crashing down. The dreams. The flashes of intuition. The way I had always sensed things just beyond perception. Vellum smiled faintly. "You are the seed," he said. "And now, whether you will it or not, the program lives on." Chaos erupted then. Guards stormed the chamber. A desperate fight. We took Vellum alive barely. The rest of the facility was sealed. For now, the nightmare was contained. But in the aftermath, as we sat together in the fading light, the truth weighed heavy. I wasn't just a bystander. I was part of this. Woven into it from the beginning. The house where time had stood still had hidden more than secrets. It had hidden the truth of who I was. And now there was no going back. Daniel, no Eve, they were my family now. And together, we faced an uncertain future. The storm had passed, but a greater war was coming. And this time, I would be ready. Thanks for watching the video, subscribe, and like the video.